So I'm back here in Namibia, and this is just one of those places that fills me with this sense of awe. And I think that's what nature photographers are looking for. That's what I'm looking for in a lot of the places that I visit. Just this sense of wonder, to be overwhelmed by the landscape. And Namibia's got that. It's just nature in its purest form. These dunes that go on forever, these big wide open spaces, massive skies. It's just incredible to shoot here. It's just something that's completely outside of my normal human experience. And being in this place that just hasn't changed for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, and probably won't change that much for tens or thousands of years after I'm gone. Now, my first trip to this place was last year. I'd wanted to visit here for years, for as long as I'd been a landscape photographer. And so when I came here last year, I absolutely fell in love with the place. Couldn't get it out of my head for months and months after that. So I'm just really, really happy to be back here again. Now, as I said, the landscape here is overwhelming, and it can be tempting to just try to capture it all. But the images that I was happiest with were the more simple compositions, the ones that were a bit more abstract, with just a few elements of the landscape and everything else that was distracting cut out. So this year when I returned, I wanted to come back and really try and focus on making really simple images. Now, there's a reason why more simple and minimal images work, why they're appealing. It's because our brains don't like to work too hard. If you've got a scene that's overwhelming, there's so many visual elements there, our brains have to work harder to try to make order from the chaos. And our brains do a very good job of that. They're quite good at editing out bits of the landscape that are distracting, but we can't do that very well with our photographs. If we take photographs that have got lots of visual chaos in them, then we can't help but see it. So what you're trying to do in any scene that you compose in photography is make some kind of order out of the chaos that you've got in front of you. And this landscape here, because it is so raw, because it is so pure, it does kind of lend itself to much more simple, cleaner compositions. Now, you'd think that creating simple images would be simple, but it's actually quite complex, because a simple image still needs to be engaging. It still needs to have enough in it to really pull you in. It needs to have a focus point, and it needs to have depth. Otherwise, your eye is just going to wander around the frame and not really kind of focus on anything. So trying to find some visual harmony, some visual balance, some depth is what really you're trying to do when you create any image. And that's really what I've been focusing on while I've been traveling around here. Now, Sossusvlei is one of the highlights of Namibia for me. You've got these incredible dunes there, the tallest in the world. And so what you're trying to do when you're shooting a place like that is just find the very essence of the scene. So when the dunes are really at their best is when the light gets really low at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. You get these really hard lines of contrast between the lit side of the dune and the shadow side of the dune. And that gives you your depth. It really makes the image, gives you some kind of three-dimensionality. But to make that stronger, what really works is just to cut the sky out completely. Now, this kind of has a double purpose. First of all, by removing the sky, you're removing a distracting element. The dunes here are very orange, and although the blue of the sky is a very complementary color, it just acts as a distraction. What I really want people to be focusing on is just that contrast between the shadow and the light, where all the depth is. And the other reason to cut out the sky is it just kind of makes people's imagination do some work. If you cut the top off the dune, then we don't know how tall it is. You've just got this wall that goes up and disappears off the top of the frame, and you're just engaging people's imagination. So I think it really, really works compositionally. It just makes the image a little bit more engaging by keeping everything really simple and clean.
So you can see in this image here, the depth comes from the contrast between the light and the dark, and the shadow behind the lit trees at the front creates a separation from the dune at the back. Now again, I've cut the sky because it's distracting and it gives the idea of this kind of wall of sand being almost infinitely high. These next two images, I've let the shadows drop to almost black to emphasize a strong line of the dune. But the shadows again are a negative space that give depth. And this image is the same with the hard contrasts and the lack of sky. But here there's wind blowing across the base of the dune that adds another layer of depth, particularly one on the shadow side where we can see the backlit sand. On our trip to the Sossusvlei, we were really lucky to get mist, which is incredibly rare here, but it helps bring another layer of mood to the compositions. Now for me, the best compositions here are the ones that feature fewer trees. And again, by cutting out the sky, it focuses the composition and gives the image a greater sense of intimacy.
While we were in Sossusvlei, we had the chance to do a helicopter flight with the doors off at sunrise and spend 90 minutes flying above the dunes. And it's a real bucket list thing for me. It's just an amazing experience, something that I've wanted to do for years. It's absolutely incredible. It gives you a whole different perspective on these dunes, because normally you were shooting them from the ground, just looking along the spine. So just to look down on them and see those same hard contrast lines of shadow and dark from a different angle, it's just incredible. From a compositional point of view, there is so much to do, but it's really challenging to photograph because you're moving in one direction, you see the compositions coming towards you, but they're always changing. The orientation of everything is changing. So if you see a leading line that you think is going to work, by the time you've got there and framed it, it's in a different position. So you have to be constantly scanning your frame, trying to make everything balanced. And I did find it incredibly challenging. And the other thing is that the helicopter is moving, it's vibrating. So you need to have really, really fast shutter speeds. So that means increasing the ISO a little bit, shooting relatively wide open so you can get a shutter speed of about 1/1000, or everything's going to be shaking and the images are going to be a little bit blurred. So again, it's the same thing. You're just looking for simple patterns, really nice lines, and the depth that comes from the contrast between the shadow parts and the brightly lit dunes.
So to compose here, I was looking for strong lines in the dunes and trying to keep everything as simple as possible. Again, letting the shadows become negative space. So for each frame, it meant kind of quickly scanning the edges of the frames to ensure that there were no brights of the landscape breaking into the shadows, which would really distract the eye. I also shot a few images a little wider to include the sky, and in all of these I shot directly into the light because the sky wasn't interesting at all, but letting the light flood in, almost clipping the highlights, it just created this really strong backlight which gave a kind of magical mood to the images.
We've also been to Quiver to shoot the quiver trees there. Now the reason that we go there is because it's great for astrophotography. You get really dark skies and the quiver trees make great subjects to put up against the Milky Way. But while we were waiting for it to get dark or in the dawn, it was a lot of opportunities for just really simple compositions, just picking out a tree, isolating it, and just seeing if we could make really simple compositions, putting the trees against just that lovely pre-dawn glow in the sky.
This lone tree had such an interesting shape, and there was a bit of pink in the sky opposite from where the sun was rising. But to shoot it from that side and get the pink behind the tree meant that the tree was front lit, and so it feels really, really flat. But shooting it from the side meant a white sky, but the side light really gives the tree so much more depth.
And the last part of the trip has been here on the Skeleton Coast in just this massive dune field that goes all the way up to the oceans. We're really, really isolated here. It's incredibly remote. There's probably not another living being for 200 kilometers in any direction, no towns. We've got no cell phone or connection or anything like that. So we've got a special permit which allows us to come in here with jeeps and make camp here for a couple of days and shoot in this incredible place. The dunes just go on forever here. Now the isolation in this place is incredible, and that's kind of the idea that I want to capture in the images. It's not so much about photographing what you see because it's all around you, these dunes that go on forever. It's trying to capture the way that this place makes me feel. So you're looking for that essence of the landscape, the things that just define the landscape, just distilling it down to the simplest elements that you can. So working with a telephoto I think is brilliant here. In the morning and in the evening you get as the sun goes down, the low light comes across and really gives you these contrasts with the dunes and really just brings out the contrast, the light and the shadow. So it's just working with the lines, looking for curves and shapes that really, really work. A wide angle here just doesn't add anything. It complicates the image. You've just got too much sand in the foreground. So this is a place that really, really kind of forces you to keep it simple. So this morning we woke up wanting to shoot the sunrise, but the fog had rolled in off the sea. We really couldn't see anything. It was just impossible to shoot. So we sat around, had breakfast, and sometime after breakfast we got these gaps in the fog that started to appear, and the golden light was cutting through the fog, giving us this really dappled light and some really high contrast on the dunes. So with a telephoto lens you can really zoom in and just focus on tiny parts of the scene, creating these abstracts where you've got the shadow and the light giving some depth, and that's constantly changing because as the light was moving around and as the mist was moving around, different parts of the scene would fall into light and fall into shadow. So it was just amazing just standing there. But then the mist rolled in again and we had about 10 minutes of this incredible magic where the whole desert just felt really almost silvery. There was a very low contrast, very, very high key, where everything was just about the line and the shape. So again, using the telephoto lens, just looking for these incredible lines, just looking for these shapes and just really zooming in on that. It's really challenging to focus because the contrast is so low. So whether you're using manual focus or autofocus, it's just very, very hard to find an edge where you can really make sure you're nailing the focus. But for 10 minutes, it was just absolutely magical. And it was one of these scenes that I very rarely get a chance to shoot scenes like that. And very few people actually get to come out here and photograph this. So being there in this place while this magic happens and photographing this scene was just really special. And I know that that's a morning that I'm really not going to forget. So right now the sky is just full of really thick cloud and everything is just very flat. Although there's some blue sky forming behind me, so maybe the cloud's going to break up and hopefully we'll be able to shoot a little bit later on. But right now it's time for lunch. I'm absolutely starving. I hope this video has been interesting. So if it has, please feel free to give me a like or to subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you enjoy my photography, if you enjoy the way I shoot, I'd love to have you join me on a workshop next year. We'll be back here in Namibia and going to lots of other interesting places. We're going to be in Patagonia, we're going to be in Greenland, Iceland, the Dolomites. We've got tours coming up in Japan. So you can find full information on all of those on my website. If you've got any questions, just drop me an email and I'll get back to you. And as ever, thanks so much for watching. Good luck with all your photography and I'll see you next time. Take care.